Wake up, everybody. It is time for the History You Forgot podcast, the podcast where these three teachers with over 90 years of teaching experience catch you up on the stuff you slept through. And we're going to bet you slept through some Cold War stuff. So guess what? Cold War Part 2 coming at you next. I'm Jason Schmoida.
I'm Jason Jones.
And I'm Jeff Breedlove. Welcome to the podcast. Like Mr. Schmoida said, it's the second part of the Cold War. Hopefully you guys caught my ad looking like an Eskimo, right? That'd be trying to do something to get some hits, right?
That's good.
Don't forget, if you do us a favor, like, subscribe, and follow us on all of our socials. That'd be great. We're trying to get up to the 1,000 number. It's a miracle number for the rest of us. So if we want to go ahead and maybe just start with, what is it we are drinking today?
What is it? The most important thing we get.
I know,
right?
right? Start off the top.
So today we have a Black Russian. And the Black Russian was actually coined before the White Russian. It actually predates the White Russian. And the Black Russian comes from 1949. And this was a Belgium, right? A Belgian bartender who made this for the U.S. ambassador to Luxembourg. It is equal parts vodka and Kahlua or a coffee liqueur. And we think it was a good named for the Cold War drink.
Name, right?
But not only that, it was, the fact that it was in Belgium and it was a U.S. ambassador getting a drink specially made for him. It kind of gives that international flavor to what we're doing. And,
Well, Mr. Schmoida, how about Fox Hill Wine and Spirits?
we should say, this is all new for us. See, we should say Fox Hill Wine and Spirits helps. That's where we get all our stuff for the podcast. They have great stuff. They carry a lot of really cool local brands.
They do.
Great wine selection.
Yeah.
Which we're actually using a Rigger vodka.
We are.
Which is a local brand.
Great local Kansas City
Right.
vodka.
Right.
So cheers to Fox Hill Wine
Fox
and
Hill Wine
Spirits
and Liquors.
and a
Thank
Black
you, Wine and
Russian.
Spirits.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's not too bad.
It's not too bad. Different. I mean, I like it, but it's just a different, it hits different.
It does.
It is very similar to a espresso martini.
It's almost exactly.
Because it's vodka
Right.
and
And
coffee and liqueur. So
Yeah.
it has that same, and I actually kind of like an espresso martini. So,
See, and I like last week, I like my martinis straight up.
yeah.
Nothing. I mean, I'm not a flavor guy, but
Yeah.
it's good. And I think we were talking earlier, right, about what is that called? A Colorado Bulldog, which is similar, but then it adds
A little bit of cream and a little bit of soda.
so the fizziness. And I can see how the Coke
like
would
Coke.
be good. Yeah, I think
Coke, not,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
cool,
like-
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
Coca-Cola. Yeah.
I can see that would make that
Yeah. It makes,
Well,
Yeah.
and the White Russian,
just
which-
cream.
it's just cream.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But it's this with cream.
cream.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. There you
Tells you
go.
how long it's been since we've been in the bar scene. Hey, so do they have a drink with this? All right.
Anyway,
What was that?
it just felt like the right old man thing
It
to say.
just did.
Anyway,
Gunt. All right. Well, we're going to do the second half, right, of the Cold War. Why don't we go ahead and start off a little bit of recap, a little bit of context. Mr. Jones,
Yeah.
remind us where we were.
So if you remember last episode, we started at the end of World War II, and we talked about Truman and the decision to drop the atomic bomb, and what a big decision that was. And Truman only being in office for several months when he had to make those types of decisions. We went from that to NATO being or the United Nations being created, and the Warsaw Pact, the Iron Curtain speech by Winston Churchill right here in Missouri at Westminster College, and how almost immediately after that you saw the Soviet Union create basically a Iron Curtain between them and Germany, right? With all those states are all in between them, that they are basically ruling puppet governments in those states. So that obviously is going to start this Cold War and get us moving in that direction.
Well, I think why do we call it a Cold War?
Well,
All the dad jokes, right?
yeah, right.
Right?
I
We
wasn't
can-
even going for the
but, I
dad
mean,
joke.
but we should, is what I mean. Like that. This is where you drop them, right?
I totally
This
missed
is where
where
we
we
drop
doing Mr. Jones. Why would they call it a
Well,
Cold War?
and you guys add in here, but it's they're not shooting at each other. The United States and the Soviet Union are not shooting at each other. So it's we call it proxy war.
Right.
Those kinds of things where one country is trying to keep communism from spreading, another is trying to keep democracy from spreading. We're providing, in some cases, boots on the ground, but a lot more often financing and weapons to help the side we want to win. So yeah, it's going to lead to the Korean War, for example, or we call it the Korean conflict. It's a police action, but we actually do shoot at Chinese soldiers in that
Correct.
in that particular war. And then you've got Truman, who's going to leave office, and it's going to go to Eisenhower, and Eisenhower, who's the war hero from World War II, and a guy who is going to go from kind of trying to just suppress communism from moving to hey, we can blow you up more times than you can blow us up. So this idea of just stockpiling nukes.
Great. Yeah. And I always talk about the fact that it's a Cold War because it, literally never gets hot. In the simple, right. There are lots of wars within the Cold War, but the Cold War is more, I don't know, you might teach us too, like more of an ideological war, right? Where us, them becomes sort of the mentality. And I know that, that Iron Curtain is also a, real, but also metaphor, for the East and the West and the forces on one
and we
side.
talked the last episode a lot about the 80s and just how every movie.
I was just thinking that exact same thing.
Where it was Rocky versus Drago. It was, you pick it. All those movies, is democracy versus communism.
Yeah, always.
And we used a little bit of the language in the last episode too about a bipolar world. In essence, where you have the two quote unquote most powerful nations on earth, and then the rest of the nations sort of line up behind them, and that makes it really easy to imagine lines drawn. Right. East, west, this side, that side. It becomes very bipolar in that way. And I think that it also lends itself to that notion of a Cold War because the entire world did not go to war with each other at any one time.
Yeah, and I think we mentioned last time too, right, that there has been a realignment, right, post-World War II, that you now have the countries that have been allies are no longer allies, countries are in play in terms of, right, which side do we choose to help us become independent or to sort of create our own economic system? And it really began, we talked with China, right, when China... Civil War, right? And by 1956,
49 was the revolution.
Like 53, 54, right? But by the mid 50s, right now, China is also communist, and so Greece is in play. Remember, Turkey is in play. A lot of these countries came out of World War II financially strapped. Yeah, and so Truman's big contribution we talked about was containment, right? The Truman
Doctrine and containment. Yeah,
just trying to keep. Clearly it doesn't work because communism spreads. But the idea that you stop it, right? You draw a line, don't let it anymore, which is really kind of what, my brain, what the Cold War was really all about. Yeah. Right. Well, containing. Trying to contain.
Yeah, it went to other places as well, right? The space race.
Sure.
It went places where, if you think about it, late 40s, 49, the Soviet Union finally has the atomic bomb. Right. And they are moving in a direction after being for so much of history to even 300 years behind everybody in the West, right? To all of a sudden they're figuring some stuff out. Yeah. They launched the first satellite, which was called Sputnik, if you remember, and it's the size of a beach ball. It's not very big.
Is it really?
It's that small. And it traveled around the earth. I believe it was 98 minutes, and it was just sending back signals. But the United States freaked out, right? We thought we were in the lead of everything, and instead of being in the lead in the space race, all of a sudden we're behind. And it's the Soviets. It's not Britain, or it's not France. It's the Soviets that we fear.
Right, which is why I always tell the kids that if they want to blame anybody for all the calculus and science and high-level classes they take, it's Sputnik, right? That Eisenhower Department of Education, if it's a thing. But Eisenhower creates an entirely new sort of federal curriculum based around science and math because we're behind, right?
Science and math, and they wanted the best and the brightest.
Right.
A lot of kids got left behind, which is kind of hints at another future teacher policy. Teachers will know what we're talking about here.
Sputnik was 57.
Yeah.
1957.
Right.
And so just to throw one more space type of issue here, this is when Kennedy, not in 57, but when he becomes president, is going to say, hey, listen, we're going to get the first people to the moon.
Put a man on the moon in this decade.
Is that your best Massachusetts accent?
I'm trying.
Okay. Well, then, and I'm asking you because I'm sure you'll know this. When then would, like Yuri Gagarin, when did the Soviets put a man up? Because they beat us.
Yeah, they did.
Right?
Well,
first of all, it was a dog. Right? That dog, like
what was it?
Laka or Laika or something like that.
Maybe,
the dog.
maybe.
I tell my kids that too. I'm like, oh, they shot a dog in this space.
Didn't we send a monkey, or was that just a TV show?
Lost in space. Both. No, I don't. I think probably. I'm sure we've sent a few monkeys.
I don't remember Yuri. I don't remember a year for that.
Oh,
I should. Yeah.
I know that. Again, they beat us with that as well, right? So the whole speech that you guys are alluding to with Kennedy is sort of much more important at the time, right? Because,
but it takes years for that to unfold. I mean, Kennedy served from 1961 to 1963. We put a man on the moon in 1969. So it took some time, but he was a prime mover in that, a catalyst to show, to keep that idea going. And we did manage to be the first, if you believe it really happened. Of course it happened.
One thing I wanted to throw out there too, with the arms race, we mentioned it last show, was the duck and cover. If you haven't gone and looked that up and watched it, it's worth watching. It's going to take 5 minutes of your life.
It is good.
It's on YouTube.
It was shown. It was the Department of Education and the National Defense
and Archer Films, like people who made Bewitched, also made like these kind of duck and cover days.
It's great. It's classic.
The little turtle and his
Anyway,
what's the one said turtle and his name was Bert.
Bert the turtle. He was very alert.
We're clearly getting a little more comfortable with the podcast format. So I think if we go back, we kind of get back on track. That the ideological issue between East and West, or democracy and communism, in the U.S. really kind of takes root in the 50s, like with McCarthyism, right? The whole Red Scare.
Yeah.
So, like, give us.
I have one. I want your guys' opinions on this, because this is something I struggle with trying to teach this to kids. So when we talk East and West, to me, we're talking the Soviet Union. Now, I know there's the Iron Curtain. There's that block of countries that buffer them from Europe. But a lot of those people aren't really buying in, I don't think, to the communist ideals. Obviously, some do. But then when you think West, I guess I want to define it for people, right? We know it's the United States, it's Britain, it's France. Do you include Spain in that? Do you include, but really, but they were fascists during World War II. Right.
Well, I think it's more geographic.
I was going to say,
but do they have the same influence? And then do you include Germany in that? Do you include Italy?
There's a mess in terms. It's not perfectly one side and the other side, but I think the Iron Curtain does a nice job of physically creating that line. East of the line is east, and everything that way is east. Especially when you think Soviet Union, eventually you get to China, you have the east.
Okay, all right.
Soviet Union, Russia's really not east. China would be east. More so, if you really want to dig into the, I would always, in my brain, the Iron Curtain is kind of that dividing line. That seems to make sense.
I always thought more of a geographic versus, just because it's easy. Right. But it's a good question.
And it's muddy ideologically for sure. That's,
like you were saying, right.
We'll probably get into this at some point in time, but I think there's a tendency to think the Soviet Union and China must have been friends, and they did not get along a lot. Right. And they did not see eye to eye a lot. So it wasn't as if they were all like-minded.
Right.
At all.
That's a whole separate episode, right? When we start talking about the isms, Stalinism is much different than Maoism, which is much different than,
And I got us off topic there. Well, not off topic, but that's the question. So you were going to go into McCarthy, Red Scare.
Think about everything that we've talked about up to this point, and it sounds like we've rehashed a lot of the stuff from the first episode, but the purpose of it is really to set this up. Like, what created this notion, especially in the United States, of a Red Scare? This is that second true Red Scare, and this was a big one. And I think a lot of it is what led to the ability of an obscure senator from Wisconsin like Joseph McCarthy to be able to put the nation into a tizzy. And when you come out and say, I have a list of names of people in government and eventually in the U.S. Army who are card-carrying communists and they're plotting to take over the country. When you have both sides with nuclear weapons, when you have, the Rosenbergs, for example, who were found to be guilty of selling secrets to the Soviet at Los Alamos, when you have bomb shelters being offered, when you have that climate,
Right.
people are going to listen to the guy who's saying, I've got the big names. I've got the names that are going to shock you. And that, nobody carried the Red Scare to his own fame like Joseph McCarthy did.
Well, was this, because also like Hollywood, right? With that whole, right, accusing everybody being a communist or whatever, right? It's kind of pervasive.
That was maybe even what gave him that stage too, because that goes back to the late 40s.
Yeah, I was going to say,
and so does McCarthy, but he
not
really
as
hit
much.
Right.
Well, just the whole duck and cover program.
Sure.
Right. Is all part of the Red Scare. And I'm not to bring up Bert again, but
it's the idea that the communists could be next door.
Right.
Yeah.
Hollywood movies were being made. The Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It's a horror movie, right? But the makers have said that they used communism as their analogy, their metaphor for the body snatchers. And then you have like the Manchurian Candidate, where the Russians plant somebody to become, I think they was going to escalate to the vice presidency and take over people were freaking out, and they probably had some evidence to make them think they should freak out.
I'm sure it went both ways.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And then, but the whole tension's being elevated is what, but then McCarthy's able to take advantage of that fear.
Yes.
And if I accuses people within the army of being communists, and that's what then leads to the probably the first televised congressional hearings,
as far as I know.
Because television was new, so it wouldn't have been right. And so I wonder if it's like the Watergate. I remember as a kid growing up and the Watergate being on, and I'm sure everybody watched it because not only was it a new thing, but this was right.
Well, and there were also only 3 channels.
That is true.
Makes a difference.
And because you had to get up and walk across the room to turn it, you didn't use left on whatever's on.
Yeah,
that's right.
But that's a double-edged sword because on one hand, the televised hearings put McCarthy on center stage.
Right.
But at the same time, it's when people tuned in and they saw the tactics he was using, and they tried to put together, who is this list? Who are these people? And he never produced the list. Were there?
Stepped,
the other thing about it is that this should be explained a little bit. Were there communists in the United States? Yes. If you think about it, going back to the 1920s and 30s, there was a communist party in the United States.
Right.
So 20 years later, did those people still live here? Well, yeah. It would be impossible to say everyone denounced it. So if you have a few people here and there and you have the remnants of what we know was a little bit of a movement, it makes it that much easier to sell that it's pervasive.
Well, yeah, because you have a scapegoat now too, right? You have the other them, whoever them is.
Right.
So but he ended up kind of getting hoisted by his own petard. He's brought down those hearings actually.
Yeah, those
showcase what a nut job he was and how far he's willing to go off the rails.
People picked up on it. And you'd mentioned this, and it's killing me. I can't remember the senator's name, but there's a famous moment during the hearings where he says, "Senator, have you no decency? Have you no sense of decency at last?" Because he's just berating some, young kid,
some army private or something, right?
I think a key point too is the fact that he never produced a list.
Right.
When you just say things, right, and there's no proof of anything you're saying ever.
Yeah.
I think that's a problem.
It is. And, I was at that point when he was called out by Edward R. Murrow. And so Murrow comes out on his show and says, hey, I want to lay this out for you. And kind of painstakingly took literally McCarthy's words, played them on live television, and then responded to them with data and with the lack of a list and with
facts.
Crazy.
Right.
Crazy.
Facts.
Yes. Yeah. And that did bring him. I thought at one point he was not reelected, and that's not the case. He just lost all of his chairships.
Right.
And then
they censor him or something. Well, he's a raging alcoholic.
Right. Died from complications from alcoholism. Right. Yeah.
Because he's not old when he dies.
No.
He just sort of fades away and dies.
Yeah.
Right.
Pretty sure he was in his 50s even.
Oh, yeah. As I say, it's not too bad. But then I think this leads up then to what you were saying then, right? The sort of craziness of this arms race. You've got this Red Scare, the U.S. and in full panic. So in order to, what they believed, I guess, is keep a balance of power, right? You end up with this arms race that you have, the term is always mutually assured destruction.
Yeah.
So, which I always love the acronym MAD.
Mad.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you alluded to it. But at one point, I think like in the early 80s, right, when the thing is sort of beginning to kind of peak up again, right, with, Reagan right before it ends. And there's something like 86,000 nuclear warheads on both sides, and they can each, everybody could destroy the world 9 times, but
Right.
we could destroy it 9.5.
Right.
So therefore, right, we're ahead. Right? I mean, like, which I think that what you end up doing though is that the idea of the Cold War, which I think is also the important part. Remember, is you avoid conflicts at any cost, and so at least hot conflicts. So, you end up with this mutually assured destruction being sort of the way in which you guarantee collective security.
Yeah.
Right. Nobody's willing to push the envelope because there's always the chance of a trigger response, and that response would be catastrophic.
Yeah.
So it keeps everybody in line, right, all the way through.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you guys agree, but I really think that the idea that it's Eisenhower that buys into this, he's a war hero. He was on boots on the ground in Europe. I think that helps the American people buy into this is a good idea.
Yeah. And when nobody probably understood the concept better than him, we're going to raise the stakes. We actually shrunk significant parts of the military. Like we weren't building tanks, we weren't building Jeeps, but we were building submarines that were nuclear capable. We were building planes that could deliver nuclear weapons, and we were building nuclear weapons to say, we're all in or we're not in.
Right.
And it does explain during those 8 years of Eisenhower why we were free of global conflict.
Yeah,
we avoided some global conflicts, potential global conflicts. But
I mean, like Hungary, we don't get involved in Hungary.
Sure.
We don't get involved in Suez Canal, right?
Correct.
Which runs in kind of a quick.
So Abdel Nasser in Egypt, under some pressure for control of the Suez Canal, nationalized the Suez Canal, put it under Egyptian control, which it does remain under this day. But the question was, should the Soviets have their thumb on someone who controls the canal? The British and the French were very upset with the handling of it, and the United States just put their hands up and said, this is not a big enough of an issue for us to, threat nuclear war.
To go hot.
Eisenhower's whole thing was that Korea was a disaster and we're never going to do that again. So he didn't want to commit how limitedly to Suez or anywhere else, Vietnam for that matter. But it didn't put us on our allies' best side.
Oh,
the British and the
by
French were
not
pretty
taking a
upset.
side, right? The British and French who actually built it and controlled it, lost it.
Right.
And so now, I mean, that's a huge.
Yes. And if you think about it, canals that are important to us, Panama, much more important than Suez, right? But Panama.
Except that I read this the other day. Sorry, like the Suez Canal is still, I think, the most heavily trafficked international waterway. Remember, like a year ago when one of those tankers went sideways and
got stuck.
And then there was like 3,500 ships in the Indian Ocean circling because they couldn't get through. And it kind of highlighted the fact that there's still a lot of boats going through.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe they should make it wider.
Yeah. Well, they just did that in Panama.
Somebody figured that out yet?
It's about 10 years ago, maybe.
What is that bumper sticker like you have on your wall that it's you know how to fix the country if somebody would just ask you?
Right. Hey, make it wider.
Come on. I mean, these. Well, I think that kind of then. So if you got this setup, right, this Red Scare, this complete craziness, this mutually assured destructive, this arms race, the U.S. feels like it's behind.
Right.
We're attempting not to get involved, so we're kind of playing this both sides of the fence. But that kind of sets up then this series of proxy wars.
Yeah.
Right. If you want to, Korea will be the first, except that's not really a proxy war because we are on the ground.
Yeah.
But getting involved in Vietnam is going to be in the mid to late 50s.
In 1954, the Geneva Conference ended the war between Vietnam and France. And that was really pretty much Eisenhower, which, of course, again, Eisenhower's not going to get involved that way. But what Eisenhower did is sent aid and American advisors to the South Vietnamese president, Ngo Dang Diem, to try to keep, Ho Chi Minh, communist leader in North Vietnam, which they weren't separated. I think they were separated by that 1954 agreement. In
Right.
fact, I think that's how that happened. And so then we were funding and sending operatives to sort of teach them, supposedly. There was some covert stuff that we know of. That'll increase then when we get to Kennedy. And that puts us a little closer.
So I mean, what's Kennedy add to this whole mix?
This is Kennedy's addition to a lot of foreign policy,
Right.
which is what Dean Rusk was his Secretary of Defense. Robert McNamara was the Secretary of Defense. Dean Rusk was the Secretary of State, and collectively they came up with what they called flexible response, because massive retaliation was kind of scaring the poop out of people. Right. And I
So
think
it's the opposite.
the idea of, it really was. It was more towards probably what Truman had done, but not as openly stopping communism everywhere it was, but flexible response. In other words, if we want to put troops on the ground, we could.
Yeah,
if we want to use nuclear weapons,
which is going to explain a lot of things that happened during his presidency.
but we didn't under Kennedy. The troops
What'd
came.
you say?
The troops came with Johnson.
The troops came with Johnson.
Okay.
Which is a whole deal. We need to, and I think this is maybe a really good time to say this, if you guys are okay with that. We need to have like a separate episode on Vietnam.
For sure.
I agree.
Because we're going to hop, skip, and jump over Lyndon Johnson here pretty much, as we have this planned out. And Johnson's role is pretty much Vietnam, and the way he handles the whole that whole first combat phase of Vietnam. And even when we get into Nixon today, I don't think we're getting too much other than the concept of détente. I know we talk about that, but I hope that's okay to say.
I mean, so let's just pick up with JFK then, right? So JFK, it's Khrushchev who is now the leader of the Soviet Union, and is going to do his best to take advantage of what he thinks is a young, unseasoned president.
Here comes this good-looking young whippersnapper, right?
Do your accent.
This is great. Park my car in Howard Yard.
like a Hyundai commercial.
It's something.
I'm trying. You guys aren't trying.
No, you're right.
I am not trying. You're right. I will give it up to the Boston accent. But the first real crisis that he has to contend with then is the second Berlin issue, right?
So the Berlin Wall. Is what his first crisis is, I guess. And so if you think about just a real quick, after World War II, the country of Germany is split in half. You've got three sectors on the west, UK, the United States and France. And then you've got the other half that's controlled by the Soviet Union. They do the exact same thing with the city of Berlin, the capital. And that city sits in East Berlin, which is controlled by the Soviet Union. So you've got this city where people can literally, I don't know if it's crossing a street, but it's basically like crossing a street, leaving East Berlin to go to West Berlin. And the Soviets don't want that. Right. The Soviets in the West have very different views on how to handle Germany. The West pumps a lot of money into Germany. They try to rebuild infrastructure, help them get their businesses back on their feet. And they do that both in Berlin and in West Germany. The Soviets are really angry at the Germans, right? The Soviets take on a role of, we aren't going to help build you back because we don't want you back. Right?
They're afraid of every war.
You've invaded us twice in 25 years or whatever it was. So East Berlin is not very nice. And so the Soviets aren't pumping the money in that the West is, and people just start walking across the street, right, going to West Berlin. And so that's when the Soviets decide they've got to put up a wall. They put up a wall with guard stations. There's a little buffer between the wall and a fence.
Like a no man's land.
And people are shot. Right. Not tons of people, but enough that it makes world news. And because I like balloons, a family makes a hot air balloon out of sheets. And flies from east to west.
There's a movie about that.
There is a movie about that.
Like a Disney movie or something.
But there's all sorts of things like that people are trying to do to get from east to west. And so in my opinion, the wall is as much keeping people in East Berlin as it is keeping the West out.
I think it's probably much more keeping. And I think the thing that I am always sort of flabbergasted when I think about this, the wall surrounds East Berlin, right? So it separates it from the West, which is bizarre. But the wall is only within that city, right? So it doesn't go anywhere else. It's a wall that looks like a no man's land, right? There's two walls on either side, but it goes up almost overnight. So that you end up putting it down the middle of certain streets. And so if you lived on one side of the street, you would be in one part, they live on the other side of the street, and so families were disrupted,
Yep.
and people who were, abroad or whatever. I mean, it goes up almost like that fast.
Well, what's
And it's
interesting
done.
about it is that was all the result. Remember, Kennedy traveled there. Kennedy actually traveled before the wall was being built. There was Khrushchev put more troops near the border. The United States added troops to the border, and they had to kind of talk that down. And Kennedy went there in the famous moment where "Ich bin ein Berliner," right? Where he says,
I'm a donut.
and some people say, "I'm a jelly donut," right? I don't know. I don't know if it was it that he didn't say it properly, or was it the bad grammar? I'm not sure how.
I think it's the fact that Berliners don't. People who live in Berlin do not call themselves Berliners.
And a Berliner was a jelly donut.
And a Berliner was known as a donut,
Gotcha,
right? So I
gotcha,
think
yeah.
everyone knew what it meant, but the people were like, "Oh," if you spoke German.
Right. It was kind of a hurrah, wave your American flag moment for Kennedy, though. And then he came home and they de-escalated. And I think for a minute there was a thought that Kennedy had done some good, and then all of a sudden, the wall.
Right.
So quickly was the response. It was kind of shocking, I think, to people.
Well, then doesn't the Bay of Pigs pretty much follow right up after the
So Kennedy.
Well, you also got. Oh, I'm sorry. You also got the B-2 bombing. And right. Was it Francis Gary Powers? Is caught. Isn't that Kennedy too?
Yeah.
Right, where he shot down a spy plane is shot down over Russia.
U-2 spy plane, right?
Wasn't it not B-2? You're right. No,
yeah.
Right, but it's shot down, and he's instead of taking the cyanide capsule that he's supposed to, he gets caught. And so there's another. I mean, first we have to admit that we're spying. So it's a black eye on the U.S. But again, it comes to Kennedy to go,
now,
okay, what do we do?
Can I be? I know you say you nerd out sometimes, so let me nerd out real quick. There's a guy named Colonel Joe Kittinger.
Okay.
And he, before this big Red Bull balloon to space, where I can't remember the gentleman's name that has the skydive.
Colonel, 5 years ago.
Yeah, Colonel Joe Kittinger was the first to do this in a capsule that was not. I mean, he was sitting in a capsule, but it wasn't pressurized. Right? He had oxygen, but his spacesuit didn't end up holding together very well. He had a hand that was freezing, but he got up to, I'm going to say 119,000 feet. The whole purpose of this was because of things like this spy plane getting shot down. Guys were jumping out of the plane after it was hit, and they were blacking out because they were flat spinning. And so this was the test of that little test parachute that pops out first. And it allowed you to use your feet kind of as a rudder. And he did that from 119,000 feet, testing it for
D2 bombs. So if they could survive injection.
So I'm sorry, I had to throw that.
No, that's crazy.
That's super cool.
All right.
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
But I mean, he had to negotiate.
Well, with him. Yeah.
I mean,
sorry, I'm the off-topic guy.
No. But I mean, it's on topic because it does.
I didn't know that.
That's great. And he doesn't. I mean, that's the whole issue here, right? Is he's not supposed to get caught, and he doesn't take the pill, and he's caught.
And that's the elephant in the room. They're spying on us. We know that. We've caught them. We're spying on them. They know that.
Cuban connection. Right? I mean, we find out very quickly then that they're also because they're spying on Cuba as well.
So again, Khrushchev, in the sense of trying to take advantage of this young guy who didn't necessarily stand up and win in Berlin. Now we find out it's also challenging in Cuba, and we realize pretty quickly that Cuba's preparing or already holding nuclear weapons coming from the Soviet Union. And of course, that might be because the United States, at the tail end of the Eisenhower administration, his vice president, Richard Nixon, had planned an operation to invade Cuba to get rid of Fidel Castro. Castro had come in power under the Eisenhower, or during the Eisenhower administration, and they wanted him out if possible. 90 miles off the coast of Florida, you don't want a communist nation.
Right.
And he was using that lingo, calling himself a communist or at least lefty. And so by the time you get to the Kennedy administration, remember Nixon was supposed to win in 1960.
Right.
But television.
And television kind of got the good looking guy.
You buy a few 100,000 votes.
That too. But you get Kennedy, and then the CIA brings the mission to Kennedy. Kennedy very tentatively gives the green light to the Bay of Pigs operation.
I didn't realize that Nixon was...
It was him and the CIA's mission. It was their joint idea. And then Kennedy reluctantly kind of went along. And that was really why Kennedy said at first, I don't know anything about it. I didn't do anything. Right. He wanted to back away from it and realized pretty quickly that he couldn't. But that was another black eye on the Kennedy administration.
Well, so they got caught.
Yeah, they got caught.
Right.
We lost a lot of people that we put up to that task.
Right.
And they were Cubans. They weren't American soldiers.
Many of
Most of them were Cubans that we had supplied.
Cuban exiles, from my understanding.
Right.
Yeah.
To overthrow Castro.
Yep.
That was the
Supplied
idea.
weapons and
right.
a way to get there.
So it
Yeah.
fails,
So now Khrushchev's putting nuclear weapons in Cuba to protect.
which we find out from spying on Cuba.
Yep.
We had spy plane photos.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Satellite photos and spy plane photos, and that brings up those 13 days, right? The 13 days where we realize there is a Russian, I think it was a sub or a ship, bringing nuclear warheads
some
to
sort of
Cuba.
convoy, right? Or
Yeah.
something. Yeah, there's like
Mhm.
multiple ships or whatever.
Yeah. And if I can nerd out for a minute,
Yeah.
there's actually kind of a really cool story in there where
I'm the only non-nerd in the group, clearly.
So I learned this from two or three different sources. So it's not mine. It's not like I know something special. But if you ever watch The Fog of War, Robert McNamara explains this. It's really cool.
It's a pretty busy documentary.
There were like 11 people that were authorized to be in the room when they were during those 13 days when they were constantly trying to figure out how to handle this. And you had the Joint Chiefs, who many of whom were pushing to bomb Cuba, invade Cuba, nuke Cuba even, and also the same to Russia and so on. And there was one guy who used to be the Russian, I want to say ambassador, Tommy Thompson. And Tommy Thompson was trying to sell the president on the idea. He's like, I knew Khrushchev. I used to be the ambassador to Russia. I knew Khrushchev. I think he got caught sending ships here. We got caught spying on them. I think there's a tit for tat that can be had. And if you offer him something, I think he'll turn those ships around. He's not crazy. He is a rational actor. He's not irrational. And luckily, Kennedy chose this one low-ranking guy in the room and said, let's try that.
What did he offer?
The idea was, we're going to, quote unquote, not blockade, because you weren't supposed to blockade.
Right.
Blockades were illegal,
Right.
but we would quarantine
Right.
Cuba, which was the same thing. And then under the table, offer to reduce nukes that we had in Turkey. And we didn't even learn about that until the 1990s, but that was really what
was the deal.
settled the deal, is that we took weapons out of Turkey. They took kept the weapons out of Cuba. And
I never knew
solved
that.
it.
Well, that's a pretty gutsy move by a young president.
Right.
Going with the lower man on the totem pole recommendation
Right.
instead of his generals and joint chief.
Yeah. And
I
conventional
think what the world
wisdom,
would have been like had.
conventional wisdom would tell you that's why he got killed, though.
It could be.
Right. If there was any,
If there's a conspiracy,
you think
around
about
it.
Lee Harvey Oswald being a Cuban sympathizer and maybe getting some cash from the Cubans to do what he did, possibly. And
which is clearly a whole nother episode.
yeah, right.
Well,
Right.
yeah.
Because I want to ask a whole bunch of questions about that last statement, but I will deflect.
Right.
True. There's a lot to say there.
But I think,
Well, and okay, then one last thing.
okay.
If we just want to totally swipe through Kennedy here, the other area that he's now being challenged on this all is Vietnam. Because right before Kennedy is assassinated, the president of South Vietnam, who we were supporting and funding and providing training for, No Dang Diem, was assassinated by his own military, by the South Vietnamese military, which meant that now there is no leader other than the military in South Vietnam. And Kennedy was contemplating, do we send troops to fill that void? Do we just bail and get out and let them handle their own mess? And in the middle of that decision was assassinated.
Really?
Yeah.
That's the timing.
And so that brings Lyndon Johnson, who's under enormous pressure right away to do something about Vietnam.
And had he already expressed like the willingness to put troops on the ground? Is that why? Was he more of a hawk?
Not necessarily,
Okay.
but I think he would slowly, well, not slowly, I mean, over the course of that year, be talked into it. I think,
Okay.
it's, again, I think to the conversations between him and McNamara, because Robert McNamara talked a lot about how he tried to talk Lyndon Johnson into not committing, or once we did commit, to pulling back. He was convinced, McNamara was convinced Kennedy wanted out. So it's really interesting to think all the what ifs there.
Right.
What if we had not put troops in Vietnam, or,
Well, all part of the Cold War, right?
I was gonna say, I think that kind of is maybe a good place to stop at the Kennedy
Yeah. So
before we get too into it.
Yeah, so just kind of recap the show, right? So we kind of gave you a recap of the first episode of the Cold War, right? But now we've talked about all sorts of things, everything from McCarthyism and the Red Scare, the buildup of weapons of mass destruction. We've entered the Vietnam era. We've talked about Sputnik and the space race, the Berlin Wall, all sorts of things that that made the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even, I guess, 89, the wall came down, right? So before we went into the 90s, but those 3 decades, pretty intense at times.
Yeah, I don't think I realized how much you could spend talking about these small little sections of the Cold War, right? I mean,
Right.
like, we thought it'd be only one episode, but clearly,
And I'm sitting here thinking of how we could roll this into 3 more.
Right.
I mean,
which I'm sure is what everybody was
well,
looking
and that's
for.
right.
we have Vietnam. Like we
Absolutely. Vietnam. I think we need to get, like,
And then-
we need to probably start with like detente.
Detente. Yeah.
And then go
Detente
through
to-
89.
Probably detente through Reagan to the
Or
end.
89. I think we might wrap it up.
Yeah. That
I
would
mean, I
be-
think so, with Gorbachev and
Well,
at least the beginning of the
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I
Sure.
do. It is Mr. Breedlove's turn to decide who he'd like to have a Black Russian with.
Oh, yeah. I
it's
hope
been
you
a
thought that
while.
through, yeah.
I feel like a Jeopardy time clock in the background here. I'm gonna go with Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think not only, I mean, I know he's such a sort of mythical figure, right, in American politics, but also in American sort of social history. I think there's so many questions around, I mean, just everything. I mean, from how he got to be president, literally, but his father's millions of dollars and, his relationships, right, across the board, his relationship with his brother, Bobby, as Attorney General, and what was really going on, and, the connections to the mob. I mean, I would love those.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of questions. Right? I mean, he's only president in a short enough time, right, that you don't really have much policy.
Yeah.
But the questions around a Kennedy, I would even skip the assassination part, but I'm talking just how he got there.
Right.
And what the deals his father must have done, and the things he'd be willing to compromise, right? And, or, whatever. But I think the Kennedy family is just such interesting. So I'd be love to sit with him and have a beer and just go, hey, just how much was true? How much was not true? Right? How much was 50 years later, we're like talking about it because it's something. I mean, we're still fascinated. Like his great-granddaughter, his granddaughter just passed away.
Yeah.
Right.
My granddaughter, I guess. Yeah. And we're still, it's like, it's the Kennedy tragedy here.
Yeah.
I mean, which it is. But I mean,
Can you think of a single leader who only served for about 3 years,
right,
who's talked about as much as him?
It's a pop culture item.
It's
right.
Oh, yeah.
And
Totally.
And I also think it'd be interesting to see, with Khrushchev pounding his fist on the table and doing the, what was he thinking as a 45-year-old guy?
Well, and we haven't even talked about the fact that isn't it Khrushchev who came and gave a speech at the United Nations and is flailing his arms around and his coat flies open and he's carrying a gun?
Yeah.
Right. And so, I mean, you can sit and call him a rational figure, but clearly there's a whole lot of stuff at play here. But no, I think Kennedy, for all of it, would just be
great.
And then I could probably hear the accent.
And
Right.
you mean a real one? If you get lucky and you sit down for a drink with Kennedy, would that mean Marilyn Monroe's nearby?
I mean,
Wow, how
what?
about
Would
just-
Marilyn Monroe be here?
Oh, Jackie.
Or
would be
she-
Sorry, that would be probably more interesting, to be honest with you.
Probably married man, right? Yeah, there we go.
Well, so maybe
Yes.
Vietnam or the civil rights, or we don't know yet.
So there's a
Protests.
whole other one.
So many ways to go.
Yeah.
Yep.
But,
But I think on that note, let's go ahead and do class dismissed.
dismissed.
Thank you guys.
Yeah,
Don't forget
appreciate it.
Fox Hill
Fox Hill
Wine
Wine
and
and Spirits.
Spirits. And like us on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify. Follow, subscribe. We'd really appreciate
even
that.
share.
Even share.
Yeah.
We're all about sharing.
We
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.